You're listening to Missing Persons, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its creators, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss a missing persons case on this podcast, please be sure to visit missingpersonspodcast.net. This episode may contain unsettling or disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
If you'd like to support Missing Persons and get VIP access to things like ad-free listening, early preview episodes, and bonus content of not only this show, but for every other podcast on the AbJack network of indie podcasts, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Welcome to Missing Persons, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about people who have vanished under mysterious or unexplained circumstances and the family members who are looking for answers. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford. Together, we created this podcast to help give a voice to people who continue to search for their missing loved ones. In some cases, even after decades have gone by. In each episode, you'll hear from Jess giving listeners the backstory and the basic facts of the disappearance.
Then Mike will speak with someone who's intimately connected to the missing person, and his guest will share their story with us. So sit back and enjoy this episode, and who knows, maybe you can help us find someone who's missing. Jamie Grissim was a 16-year-old student at Fort Vancouver High School in Washington State when she disappeared on December 7th, 1971. Jamie was born on November 11th, 1955, and her sister, Starr Lara, who is our guest today, was just 18 months younger. The two girls and their younger twin siblings were all committed to the Washington foster care system after their mother suffered what, at the time, was called a nervous breakdown. The two girls largely managed to stay together, but the twins were adopted by a local family and were not in contact with their older sisters. In the early winter of 1971, Jamie and Starr were living with an elderly foster mother. Despite the obstacles she faced in life with no stable home life or parental role models, 16-year-old Jamie was a good student, a creative writer, and a talented artist. She was also a lover of horses. She loved riding and was a member of the 4-H club. Jamie was, in many ways, a typical teen. She loved rock music and went on dates with boys. But she was also a fierce protector of her adoring little sister, Starr. And that last summer, 1971, the two did everything together. Starr remembers that Jamie left to take the bus to school that morning, December 7th, 1971. It was a very cold day. Jamie only had 2 classes that day and expected to be home early. She told Starr to let their foster mother know when she awoke that Jamie would return by early afternoon. But she didn't. Records show that Jamie was at school that day and attended her classes at Fort Vancouver High School. She planned to walk home. But when Starr arrived home later in the afternoon, her foster mom said she hadn't seen Jamie. This was cause for immediate concern for both Starr and the girl's foster mother. Jamie was reliable and true to her word. She had gone out of her way to make clear to Starr that she planned on coming home. When she didn't, Starr reported her sister missing. Local police told Starr that she had to wait 30 days to file an official missing persons report. Missing teenagers, especially foster kids back in those days, were not something police got too worked up about. An agonizing few months passed for Starr, and then there was news. Jamie's purse and wallet containing her ID were found lying along a roadway in Dole Valley near Yakult on May 1st, 1972. This was 20 miles from where Jamie and Starr were living at the time. Jamie didn't have a car and had no way of getting to that area on her own. Starr said that when her sister's things were found, she knew it was a very bad sign. Starr was right to be concerned. Jamie was just the first young woman to go missing in the area in the same time frame. On February 11th, 1972, 18-year-old college student Barbara Ann Derry was last seen hitchhiking along State Highway 14. Her body was found on March 29th at the bottom of a silo at the Cedar Creek Grist Mill in northern Clark County. She had been stabbed to death. No one put the two cases together at the time, but Jamie's personal items were found just 2 months later in East Clark County. In 1974, it happened again. 14-year-old Diane Gilchrist left her family home on Franklin Street on May 19th. Like Jamie Grissim, Diane has never been found. 19-year-old Gloria Nadine Knutson vanished on May 31st, 1974. On July 11th, 1974, Krista K. Blake, age 19, was hitchhiking at 29th and K in Vancouver when she accepted a ride from a man in a blue van. Her family reported her missing when she never arrived in Portland. On July 17th, 1974, a 15-year-old girl named Norma Countryman was picked up by a man in a blue van. He punched her in the face, used a knife to control her, and tied her up, but she managed to escape. On August 2nd, 1974, 18-year-old Carol Valenzuela went missing after last being seen hitchhiking. Martha Morrison, age 17, disappeared in September 1974 after leaving her apartment in Portland. There was some question as to whether she was ever reported missing. It all finally came to an end on October 1st, 1974. An unnamed 20-year-old woman from Camas got into a blue van driven by a man who accosted her. He raped her, shot her in the chest with a pellet gun, choked her unconscious, and stabbed her 5 times. He left her for dead in Washington Park, but miraculously she survived. She was able to describe the man who victimized her and his vehicle, and police arrested Warren Leslie Forrest the next day. He was charged with first-degree rape, assault, and armed robbery for this incident, but soon he would be facing murder charges. 10 days later, on October 12th, a hunter found the skeletonized bodies of 2 women lying on the ground about 100 feet apart in the woods in Dole Valley. One of them was identified as Carol Valenzuela, missing since August 1974. The other was not identified until 2015, and she turned out to be Martha Morrison, missing since September 1974. The bodies, dumped by the same person, were found within 1 mile of where Jamie Grissim's purse and wallet were found in May of 1972. Back to Warren Forrest. He was prosecuted for the attack on the Camas woman, but was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was committed to a mental institution. Then, on July 7th, 1976, a woman's body was found bound and partially nude in the woods at Tukes Mountain. This was the same area where Norma Countryman had been assaulted. The body turned out to be Krista K. Blake, missing since July 1974. The Clark County Sheriff's Office believed that Forrest killed Krista and several of the other murdered and missing women. In 1978, they compiled a report linking Forrest to the cases of Barbara Derry, Carol Valenzuela, Martha Morrison, Norma Countryman, the Camas woman he was acquitted of assaulting, and Jamie Grissim, believed to be Forrest's first known victim. That same year, in May of 1978, the remains of Gloria Knutson were found near Lacamas Lake. It took 4 years for authorities to identify her. Warren Forrest was tried for and found guilty of the first-degree murder of Krista K. Blake in 1979. He was sentenced to life in prison. Although the Washington authorities believe that he is responsible for the disappearances and presumed murders of at least 6 of the women we've discussed, he was never charged in any of their cases, until 2019 when that changed. In 2013, he confessed to his therapist to assaulting 13 women and girls, but he admitted to killing only Krista. So how is Warren Forrest connected to Jamie Grissom? Well, her personal items were found in very close proximity to the bodies of Carol Valenzuela and Martha Morrison, both of whose murders have been attributed to Forrest. But that's not all. Starr Lara, Jamie's sister, tells us she believes that her sister knew, or at least knew of, Warren Forrest, whose family home was along the route she would have walked regularly to go to the store. It's possible that she trusted him enough to get into his car on that cold day. Police and Starr believe that Jamie was likely his first murder victim. Jamie's case is the oldest missing persons case in Clark County. If you have any information regarding Jamie's whereabouts, please contact the Clark County Sheriff's Office at 360-397-2024. Mike Morford sat down with Starr Lara to talk about her sister's case. That conversation is coming up after a word from our sponsors. And please stay tuned after the interview for some updates.
This episode of Missing Persons is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. You know, I've been podcasting since 2017, and for most of that time, it's been my full-time job. But when I left my job in sales, a career that I had for 20 years, to pursue podcasting full-time, it was stressful. I was worried whether I was making a mistake. Would I be able to support my family the way I wanted to? As excited as I was to be tackling a new career, I couldn't help but worry about my new future, and at the same time, I was worried so much, the stress of it kept me up at night. Do you ever find that just as you're trying to fall asleep, your brain suddenly won't stop talking? Do your thoughts start racing right before bed, or at inopportune moments? That happened to me a lot, but it turns out that one great way to make those racing thoughts go away is to talk them through. Therapy gives you a place to do that, so you can get out of your negative thought cycles and find some mental and emotional peace. And it empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. Maybe if you're like me, you're stressed over a career change, or perhaps you've experienced trouble in a relationship. Therapy may help you see things clearer, and if you're considering starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/MP today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/MP. This interview with Starr was done back in 2019, and as just mentioned, you'll hear updates on this case after the interview concludes. Hi, Starr, and thanks for joining me to discuss Jamie's case.
Oh, you're welcome.
Can you tell me a little bit about Jamie, what your memory is of her, and what kind of person she was?
Well, Jamie was very outgoing, and she had many talents. Like, she could write poetry really well. She had beautiful cursive writing. I always envied that. And she could draw really well. And she actually had won like a $500 scholarship for her artwork. And that was quite a bit back in the 1970s. And yeah, she was just multi-talented that way, very artistic. My last memories were of wrapping Christmas presents together. And, you know, she did them very fancy with curled ribbon and all that. And they were perfectly wrapped, like a professional would do it, you know. And she actually loved Joe Cocker, Creedence Clearwater. She loved the Bee Gees. She loved Elvis. Yeah, she loved rock music. That last summer we went to a few dances out in the country at a Grange called Hawkinson Grange Hall. Yeah, those are some of my favorite memories of her. And of course, she always, as my big sister, she protected me. And, you know, she would pick on me as we got a little bit older, like when I was around 10, especially because my foster mother said, you know, you don't need to let Jamie boss you around. She's not your boss. I go, she's not? Because I kind of thought she was, you know. So, you know, we we argued a little bit after that, but that's normal. But we went everywhere together that last summer. The first time I went horseback riding was with her because that was one of her big things. She was an avid horseback rider, and she loved horses, and she was fearless with them, whereas my first horseback ride was with her, and I've only had 3 in my life. So, yeah, those are some of my fondest memories.
So it sounds like she was pretty busy, outgoing, like a typical teenager, it sounds like.
Yeah. She had more interests that way, I guess, than I did. I didn't develop a lot of artistic things or ideas until later on.
Was she mature for her age? And I've read a couple places that she was sort of a little bit of a mother to you.
Yeah, she was mature for her age and very intelligent.
And how long had you been in foster care together?
Well, since I was 3 and she was 4, we were like 13 months apart. So my mother basically had a nervous breakdown, and so she just wasn't capable, and they took us away for neglect. And there were other siblings, but we didn't know them as when we were children. I met some of them in my 20s, so she never got to get reunited with our mother, which we always hoped for that when we were children. And eventually, our mother lost total rights to us when I was like 8 and Jamie was 9. And so we got set up for adoption like 3 or 4 times. But we had a pact between us that you either took both of us or you didn't take either of us. That's kind of how we were.
So I take it your other siblings were older than you at the time?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, except there were a set of twins, and they were like 18 months younger. So the 4 of us had the same father, the twins, and then Jamie and I. But she never got to meet them until, well, she disappeared, so she never did get to meet them. I met them in my early 20s when I got married.
And that was something that she was hoping to do one day, was be reunited with her family?
Yeah. Yeah, we always hoped for that. It was kind of a strange thing because the people that adopted them, they lived in our hometown where we were growing up. And so we had friends that knew them, but their adopted mother made sure she kept us separate. And so we never did get to know them as kids, you know.
And did you have one steady family that you lived with, or did they sort of move you from place to place as you guys were growing up?
Oh, they moved us quite a bit. Our very first foster home, I think we were probably there almost 2 years, from the time I was 3 till I was 5. Then they moved us to another one, and we were there like a year, and they had to move to Colorado, and they wanted to take us with them, but back then you couldn't move foster children from state to state, and they really didn't have the money to adopt us. They would have had they had the money. And then I went to live with my kindergarten teacher. Actually, I think briefly both Jamie and I went to live there. And then she left. Jamie left to another foster home, and I stayed there for a while. I mean, I could go on and on about the different ones, but there was one particular one. I think I got there when I was going on 8, and Jamie was 9. And then we loved her a lot. Her name was Mama Grace. We called her that anyway. And we went there off and on, and I think we may have stayed a year the first time, and then we got set up for adoption in Seattle, and then we came back, and then we stayed, a year or so more, and then she was old. She had health issues. She was in her 70s, and So we also got set up for adoption again, so we left, and then we came back briefly, and then we left again, and then we were gone like 2 years, actually longer. We didn't come back there until that last summer. We both had the opportunity to go back there together and be in the same place, because sometimes we were separated. There wasn't a home that could take both of us. So sometimes we got separated because they couldn't take both of us.
And was it hard on you bouncing around sort of like that from place to place, sometimes without each other?
Oh, yeah, that was very hard. Yeah. And sometimes we didn't get to visit enough. And, you know, that was very hard. That was probably the hardest part, besides just the instability and going to a new school and that sort of thing.
At the time that Jamie went missing, were you living together at that time?
Yes. Yeah. I left my foster home, which I really loved, the one I was staying at, the Gillises. And I left there, though, to go stay with Mama Grace again, because she could take both of us. And Jamie was already there. And so had I not done that, we wouldn't have had that last summer together. So, I mean, there was probably a reason. But, yeah, I was staying there when Jamie disappeared. We were staying there together, and we went swimming almost every day that summer out at Lacamas Lake, and we both got summer jobs, and yeah, it was a really nice summer. That's when we went horseback riding. Say the old lady had me chaperone on her date, which was kind of funny. You know, what's a little sister good to? But yeah, so I went on a lot of her dates, kind of as the third wheel.
And so you were the nagging little sister that was going along with her.
Right, yeah. Just not exactly what you'd want on a date.
When she first disappeared, when she vanished, were you alarmed? Was she the kind of person that would sometimes leave for any stretch of time, or did you think right away that something was unusual?
Oh, I knew that day, because she'd gone out to the bus, which was at the end of our driveway. They picked her up, and she came back in like 10 minutes later, and it was very cold, and she mentioned how cold it was out there, and she came in and checked on our foster mother, Grace, because she had a bad heart, and she wanted to see how she was doing, and she was very caring that way. And probably I, at the time, was more self-centered, you know. And she went to check on her, and then she came back into the kitchen, and we sat down, and she said, "Make sure you tell Grace that I'm walking home from school. I only have 2 classes," because Fort Vancouver High School was like college. Some days you might only have 2 classes, or 3, and they called it a modular schedule. So I said, "Okay, I'll be sure to tell it." And she said, I should be home about 1:30 or 2. I said, "Okay." And I didn't see Grace in the morning, so I didn't want to wake her up. So I went to junior high, and I got home like at 4. And I said, after a few minutes, I noticed Jamie wasn't there. And I said, "Where's Jamie?" And Grace said, "I don't know. She hasn't come home from school yet." And I said, "Well, that's very strange, because she told me to specifically tell you she would be home by about 1:30 or 2, and that she was walking home." And she never did come home. And the darker it got, the more I knew something really bad had happened, because that was just not like her at all.
Were both of you alarmed by this point? Did either of you decide you were going to call the police?
Yeah, I actually called our caseworker. She had been our caseworker since I was 12. Jamie was 13. And I called her, and she immediately knew something was wrong. And she went down to the police station that very night, and she tried to file a missing persons report. Well, back then it was 30 days. You could not file it for 30 days, which was crazy. And so she filed some kind of report, just like a informational kind of report at 10:30 that night. And then, of course, a month later, they filed the official missing persons report. But I called everybody, all her friends at the time. I think I had her phone book, her address book, and I called everybody. Nobody knew where she might be or talked to her or anything.
Now she did make it to school that day, correct? And then left school?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. She did make it to school.
And then somewhere along the walk home is when she disappeared.
Right. Exactly.
How hard was it for you that 30 days with no answers until that official police report went through and police started looking? It was a tough.
It was
waiting
very
for her.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at the time, I don't think they took it that seriously because they didn't understand why we were foster children. I guess foster children had a stigma then, and they probably still do, unfortunately. But I think people are more aware that it's not the child's fault. But I think there was a lot of that. But my caseworker luckily knew something was really wrong, and her husband, he was like one of the higher ups in the juvenile hall. So they both, if it hadn't been for them, I don't know if they would have taken it as seriously, but they did do some searches with search dogs for her, and they talked to a lot of people. But it was like she just vanished. And then I found out when I was 19 that 6 months after she disappeared, they had found her belongings way out in rural northeast Clark County. It's pretty rural even today. And they had found the belongings like up the road from where they found these two girls' remains. They were like up a hill off of the road. And I knew at that point that she was just never coming back. I knew that. And prior to that, I used to get her Christmas presents and write her letters. And because, I wanted her to know I didn't forget her. But I knew at that point, regarding these two girls' remains, that she wasn't coming back. And it was at that point they started linking her disappearance to a guy named Warren Forrest. Took them a while.
And just to back up real quick, so it's not for 3 years until 3 years after that her belongings were found along this area.
Oh, no. Her belongings were found 6 months after she disappeared.
Okay. And then,
but they didn't find these other girls until, a little over 2 years later. So they kind of knew at the point they found her belongings that something was really wrong.
And they initially thought she might have been a runaway or sort of dismissed it as something like that. And then I think they realized that there probably was more to it when they found these other girls.
Exactly. Oh, then they started putting the pieces together. And then, of course, they found those two. One, they didn't know who it was. And so I became kind of linked. My life became kind of linked with these two girls because of Jamie. And the one that was never identified, that one always haunted me because I thought, well, maybe it's her. Even though they said the dental records ruled her out. That's why they said, no, it's not her. But it always bothered me that she was unidentified. And then in 2005, I asked for DNA testing to be done just to rule Jamie out definitively because they really didn't have good dental records of Jamie. They just had some notes from the dentist. And so I think I waited for a year for those DNA results that came back that it wasn't Jamie. But they didn't know who the girl was, you know. And then they, right around the same time, they did a facial reconstruction of this unknown girl. And I think that's when I requested a DNA test because people started calling me. They saw it on the news and they said, you know, you really should get a DNA test. It looks like a lot like Jamie. And the initial reconstruction did look like her. And so that's partly why I asked for the DNA test. And then, when was it? Like in 2015, I was talking to the detective at the time that was working on Jamie's case. I asked him, what about this unknown girl? Can you do some DNA testing on her? You know, I know that, you know, I can't remember why I asked him because we had the DNA test. I said, can't you do a DNA test on her and find out who she is? And my friends said, you know, if they don't do it, you know, dig her up and find out who she is. We need to get a petition going. So, you know, I kind of told the detective that, and it was at that point that he told me this girl's remains were lost. They'd been lost for over 30 years. And that was just like, it was like, that really bothered me. It was like he kicked me in the stomach, you know, just knocked the wind out of me. I thought, how could you lose her remains? You know, how could, not he personally, but how could her remains be lost? I thought, whoever she is, her family's just suffering, right?
It's like she's lost twice, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And so, anyway, I worked closely with this guy, this reporter in Portland, Oregon, named Dan Tilken of Channel 6, and he always took an interest in Jamie's, worked very closely with me on it, and I told him, and he said, well, let me dig around, see what I can find out. And initially, the Clark County Sheriff was saying, we gave it to the medical examiners, and the medical examiner would tell me, no, we gave it back to the Clark County Sheriff. So I started calling it musical remains. And then the reporter was able to find out that they shipped this girl's remains, which was basically just a skull, to Dr. Clyde Snow in Oklahoma. And he was a renowned forensic anthropologist. You know, he's very famous. And at this point, he was like 83 years old. And I talked to him on the phone, and he said, Starr, he said, I know I sent these remains back. I distinctly remember this girl because she didn't have a lower jaw. And he said, give me a week. He said, I keep meticulous records. He said, I will find the FedEx letter because he sent it back FedEx. Sure enough, a week later, he sends me the FedEx letter. And so I let the reporter know, and I also let the medical examiner know, because she was telling me it's none of my business. And I got pretty upset about that. I said, yeah, it is my business. My sister's linked with whoever killed those two girls. But besides that, I know what it feels like, what that family's going through. So, yeah, it is my business. And I called the prosecutor and let him know the conversation, said, I'll handle that. So the next time I called, she was a lot different. And when I got the email from Dr. Clyde Snow, I forwarded it to her, and then I called her, and she said, okay. She said, this proves that we did get them.
And she said, give me a couple months and I'll dig around. Well, a couple months went by and she called and let me know they found them. And they were in the other girl's evidence box, the girl that they, found close to her body. And so they had actually stored them there. And of course, their take on it was, oh, they were never lost. That's their official take. They were never lost. They were just misplaced. Well, if you had $1 million and you didn't know where it was for 30 years, you could pretty much say it was lost, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's the spin officially that they did with it. And I don't blame them for losing them. I just was shocked that no one ever told me, because they moved a lot. They didn't have, back in the 70s, they didn't have the technology that they have now. And they, at one time, the evidence was even stored in a trailer, all the evidence. So, I can understand how it happened. But, I just was shocked no one ever told me. So it leads me to believe there's probably other things I don't know. And I understand now, they have to keep some things under wraps anyway to solve things. But.
Yeah. And did they ever identify her once they did realize that they had her remains, or are they trying to do that now?
Oh, they actually, it's kind of amazing. They did identify her. I think it came out in, I can't remember, late 2015 or early 2016. They actually had to dig up her father's remains to confirm it. But they did finally identify her. Her name, I believe, is, I know her first name is Martha, and I think the last name is Morrison. But they finally found out who the girl was. And the last anybody had seen of her was in 1974. And so I got to talk to her sister after they found her remains, because her parents had passed. And, it was a really, it was a nice feeling to talk to her and know that, they finally found her sister. And her sister died like 4 months later after I talked to her, sadly. But yeah, so they know who she is. And then once they got the DNA, then, in 2017, it came out that Martha's DNA was found on this already convicted killer's dart gun that he used to stab these girls with. And they expected it to be the blood of the victim where they found the dart gun, which was out at Lappin's Lake. They thought, well, it's going to be that victim, right? And that's where we'd gone swimming that summer. And anyway, they did the DNA test, and it came back as Martha's. I mean, it kind of gives you chills when you realize how everything played out. Because had Martha not been identified, they never could have figured out whose blood DNA was on that dart gun, right? And Warren might have said, hey, it's not mine, right?
Yeah.
Must be some other killer. So it's really incredible how it all played out. And since they announced the DNA on the dart gun that was actually Martha's blood, the prosecutor has been working on trying to bring together a case, but of course it doesn't happen overnight, and it's been 2 years now.
I just wanted to ask you, so they essentially knew who one of the girls was, and then they eventually found out who the other girl was.
Right.
Did you know them personally growing up, or do you know if your sister knew either of the victims?
That I don't know, but I do know one girl that's linked to him, because they did a whole crime synopsis like in 78, of all the girls that they believe Forrest killed. And it started out with my sister, and it went from there. And one of the girls went to my high school. I didn't really know her personally, but she went to our high school. And so I have friends that knew them, but we all were kind of in the same kind of circle, but I didn't know them personally, no. But I have friends that knew some of them.
Was Warren Forrest somebody that you had ever heard of or knew, or possibly your sister knew?
Well, that's the thing. We didn't know at the time, but I didn't personally know him. But I found out that his parents' house was less than 2 miles from us. I found this out, 35 years later. And it was a house that we walked past all the time to go to the store. And by this time, when Jamie disappeared, he was 22. And she was 16. So he had moved out from his parents' home. But as children, we walked by there hundreds of times because that's how we got to the store. So I do believe she knew him. Absolutely, I believe she knew him. And he had a lot of reasons to be in the neighborhood. And I believe he came along, and it was really, really cold that day. And I think he said, "Hey, you want to ride?" And she knew him, and she took it, because I can remember our last conversation that summer. And one of them was, she told me, "Don't you ever hitchhike." She said, if I find out you've hitchhiked, I'll kick your ass, is what she said. So I know she wouldn't have been hitchhiking. She wouldn't have accepted a ride from someone she didn't know.
Which is pretty big, because back then a lot of people hitchhiked, but for her to not hitchhike, that says that she was very safety conscious.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And she also, I can remember another conversation we had. And, of course, these last conversations stuck with me because she had disappeared, and we were sitting on the back porch of where we lived, and, she was asking what kind of boys I liked. And I said, I like dark-haired, brown-eyed boys. And she said, "No, not me. I like blonde-haired, blue-eyed boys," right? Well, when I first found out about Warren, I think that was in 2000, is when I first found out about him. I found out, he had blonde hair and blue eyes, which, that just kind of gave me chills, because I thought that's probably one of the reasons, if she didn't know him, but I believe she knows, but it's probably why she trusted him. And there were just too many connections. He was a Vietnam vet, and he was in the Army Reserves, and my sister's last summer job was down at the Vancouver barracks in Vancouver, Washington. And so they could have ran into each other there, not to mention we went swimming out at Lacamas Lake, like every day practically that summer. And he was out at Lacamas Lake. We already know, because he is linked to killing one girl out there, and actually he tried to kill both girls, but one girl survived and made it to the road. So it's just, there's all these links, it's like just too many.
So currently today, investigators are trying to link him definitely to your sister's case as well. Right.
At this point, it's really hard, because there aren't remains, and there's not a particular crime scene. When somebody disposes of a body so it can never be found, it's really hard. But they are trying. That's why they, if you go to the Clark County website, sheriff's website, they have a cold case page, and they list Jamie at the top of the page. So they know, they do keep her case as open as you can for something like that.
So,
and, the only way is to keep her story out there, and hopefully somebody, will make a connection or find something or remember something.
yeah, and you mentioned earlier that you used to get Christmas presents for her, but at some point when her stuff was found, you in your mind knew that she was gone, which as a teenager that must have been pretty tough. So you accept all these years later that she is dead and most likely at the hands of this person.
Yeah.
How difficult have these last almost 50 years been for you to go through life without your sister?
I get choked up. Well, it's been hard. And especially, the first 5 years I cried all the time. And, it kind of turned me against religion, I guess you would say, too. And, I was brought up to believe, God's responsible for everything. And at that time, I kind of turned against religion and didn't go to church anymore. I haven't ever since. But, I've come to realize God can't control us, and he didn't control what happened to her. And he can only try and appeal to Warren's heart and have him release the truth. But that's the best he can do. And I understand that now, but it was really hard. And, I think of all that we missed together. And, she had just turned 16. She didn't get a chance to get out there in the world and what she could have become and how different both of our lives would have been. So it's actually the last couple of years have been really hard because I know they have DNA evidence on this killer for Martha. Everybody knows, it's been all over the local news. And we're just waiting for him to get charged so that he can get convicted of one more murder and he will never come up for parole. Because as it is since 2011, every 2 to 3 years he comes up for parole. And then the families have to go and speak out against it. And it's very annoying because we all know he killed more than one girl. But his reasoning is, I've only been convicted of one. So I deserve to come up for parole every 2 to 3 years. When we all know he killed more, but until he's charged with another one, he can keep coming up for parole. Luckily, the Washington State Parole Board refuses to release him. And in fact, in 2017, they sentenced him, because he was sentenced to 36 years to life. That's why he keeps coming up for parole, because 36 years, I think, was in 2011. And that's when his first parole thing came up. And in 2017, they gave him 5 more years because he did a whole sexual history timeline. It was part of his thing. In order to ever be released, he had to go through this sexual therapy program. And one of the requirements in that was to list his sexual history timeline. Well, he described 13 victims in that timeline. I believe it was 13 anyway. And he had to list their ages and his age. That's the only details he'd give, except he went on to say that only, out of all the victims, only one escaped or one got away. Never used the word murder because he knows if he did that, he could be charged. But he admitted to raping and torturing them all. And he wouldn't give identifying information. So in 2017, the parole board gave him an additional 5 years for withholding the truth. And the parole board knew at the time they had DNA evidence with Martha on his dart gun. The parole board had been told that by the sheriff. So they gave him another 5 years. So he's between a rock and a hard place, because if he tells the truth, for sure he wouldn't get out. But if he doesn't tell the truth, he's not getting out either. So, yeah, that's kind of where it's at.
How hard is it to know that he's probably the person that did this, but just not having that proof to definitively? Is that as important to you now as maybe recovering your sister's remains to give her a proper burial? What would you like to see happen?
That's ultimately what I would like to see, because it bothers me that he just threw her out somewhere, and God knows only where. He knows. And I have forgiven him for killing her. I really have. Because I think, there's something very mentally wrong with him. But he's clever like a fox, and he knows what he's doing when he withholds the truth. And that's why that part I'm not going to forgive him for, and I won't forget. Because that's the worst thing he has done. Besides murdering these girls, that's the worst thing he's done. And that shows to me he truly has no remorse. Because if he did, he'd tell the truth. I mean, even Jeffrey Dahmer told the truth. So it's like, no, that's the last 2 years, besides the first few years. And when I found out about those girls' remains, the last 2 have been really hard, because we're all waiting for him to get charged on Martha's murder, because at least Martha's murder, because there's DNA evidence for that.
Well, hopefully that happens. We see a lot of cases in the news every week, it seems like, on TV being solved, and maybe they'll come through and with something that can connect him to the case and charge him with Jamie's murder.
Mm-hmm. And I hold out hope for that. I know they have things they have to withhold from me regarding Jamie's case. I have no doubt about that. And just recently, there was a girl that they found in 1980 out there. Not, she wasn't linked to Forrest, but it was found way out in Clark County in the remote area. And all that was found of her was her skull. And so they just recently announced on the news last week, they finally identified her. So that was like, how many years later? 39 years after they found her. And I actually had Jamie's DNA compared to her too, just to be sure, even though they didn't think it was her. And of course it came back as negative. It wasn't her. But it's incredible that they finally identified her. They used that same kind of familial DNA to do that. So I have a lot of faith in them with regard to that.
And that's a good reason to be hopeful, because those techniques that they use to catch the killers also help identify unclaimed victims. So it sort
exactly.
of has, there's a double benefit to that genealogy work that they're doing with the DNA.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, 50 years is a long time for you, and I hope that they're able to make a case against him and give you some kind of peace that way, and then hopefully maybe his conscience at some point kicks in and he helps you find her remains, maybe so you could say a proper goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's kind of strange because his ex-sister-in-law, he married his childhood sweetheart. And people know her, and they know his ex-sister-in-law. And she was actually on my Facebook for a while, but she got tired of me calling him a monster.
and not using his name. And she just basically got tired of me saying what I thought of him. And I said, well, out of respect for you, I didn't use his name, but if you want me to call him Warren Forrest serial killer, I could do that. So she basically disconnected from me. And she still honestly believes that he probably only killed one because he was very charming. That's how he was able to get away with what he did, because he wasn't smart. He was not smart in the sense that he took these girls behind locked gates at the county park where he worked. People saw him, and it's like, that's not very smart as a killer to take them to where you work. And he did things like that. So had he been out now doing these things, he would be caught almost immediately.
Hopefully whatever crimes he's responsible for, they will identify all of them, and including your sister, and you can have some kind of justice.
Thank you very much. And I will accept, if he gets convicted on one more murder, that will be a lot of justice, because it will be the girl that Jamie has been linked to for so long. And getting justice for her will mean a lot. And it will shut him up for the rest of his life. He will never come up for parole. And that's what I hope for.
Wow. Well, I really appreciate you opening up about Jamie's case.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
We like to bring awareness to cases that a lot of people may not have heard of, or older cases that people have forgotten about. So whenever we can do that, sometimes it's something we like to do.
Just some updates and clarifications from Starr's interview, which was recorded previously. In August of 2017, advanced DNA testing allowed Clark County investigators to connect DNA from Martha Morrison to blood found on the grip of an air pistol owned by Warren Forrest, the one he used to shoot the chemist woman he raped and tried to kill. The now 72-year-old was charged with Martha's 1974 murder in December of 2019. And after a lengthy trial process that was delayed numerous times because of COVID, he was found guilty on February 1st, 2023. He was given another life sentence. He is not admitted to killing Martha or any of the others believed to be his victims, nor has he ever revealed where he disposed of Jamie Grissim's remains. In Starr's interview, you heard her mention the remains of another young woman whose partial skull was found in February 1980 near Yakult, Washington, in the same area where Jamie's personal belongings were located on the roadside in 1972. This young woman was unidentified for decades. Starr submitted DNA for testing against her remains in case the remains turned out to be Jamie. They weren't, but no one knew who she was until she was identified using forensic genealogy in 2019. It turns out this was Fly Creek Jane Doe, now known to be teenager Sandra Renee Morden. She had gone missing in spring of 1977 at age 16. You heard me cover her case in depth in one of my DNA ID Doe episodes this season. Until Sandy was finally identified, police believed that this victim, too, could have been the work of serial killer Warren Forrest. She was found in the same area where he discarded some of his other victims. But Sandy didn't disappear until spring of 1977. By that time, Warren Forrest was already institutionalized for his attempted murder of the 20-year-old chemist woman. Someone else killed Sandy Morden. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Missing Persons. If you can provide any information to help solve the case we discussed in this episode, please contact the appropriate authorities.
If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to tell your friends about Missing Persons and invite them to listen to the show. Word of mouth will help us grow and bring these cases to a larger audience. You can also help us by taking a moment to rate and review Missing Persons on the platform you're listening to us now on. Just a reminder that new episodes of Missing Persons air every other Saturday. If you want to find us on social media, we're on Facebook at facebook.com/missingpersonspod. We're also on Twitter with the handle @missing_pod. And of course, you can find us and contact us through our website, missingpersonspodcast.com. On behalf of Jess Betancourt, this is Mike Morford saying thanks, and we'll see you next time on Missing Persons.